The snow fell in gentle spirals across the Montana landscape, each flake catching the late afternoon light like tiny diamonds. Sarah Beth Whitmore pressed her face against the cold window of the stagecoach, watching the endless white fields roll past. Her heart hammered beneath the blue silk of her wedding dress, the same dress her mother had worn 25 years ago in Boston. The lace veil, yellowed with age but still beautiful, lay carefully folded in her lap. She was traveling to marry Thomas McKinnon, a rancher she had never met. Their fathers had arranged the match through letters, promising her a good life in the Montana Territory. Thomas owned the Lazy T Ranch, they said, with a fine house and good cattle. Sarah Beth had imagined their meeting 1,000 times during the long journey west. The stagecoach lurched suddenly, throwing her against the wooden side. Outside, she could hear the driver shouting over the wind. The horses whinnied in distress, their hooves struggling for purchase on the icy ground. Sarah Beth gripped her small leather trunk tighter, her knuckles white with cold and fear. "Wha there?" came the driver's voice, followed by a string of words her Boston upbringing had never prepared her to hear. The coach came to a shuddering stop, tilting at an odd angle. Through the window, Sarah Beth could see they had slid partway into a snow-filled ditch. The driver's weathered face appeared at her window. "Mom, I'm mighty sorry, but we're stuck good. There's a ranch house just over that ridge. Looks like you'll need to spend the night there while I work on getting us free." Sarah Beth's stomach dropped. She was supposed to arrive at the Lazy T Ranch before sunset, where Thomas would be waiting. What would he think when she didn't appear? Her hands shook as she gathered her belongings, and not just from the cold. The walk through the snow was treacherous. Her delicate Boston boots, chosen for their appearance rather than their practicality, filled with ice crystals that melted against her stockings. The driver carried her trunk, leading her up a winding path toward a warm glow of light in the distance. The ranch house that emerged from the swirling snow was smaller than she had expected, but it looked solid and welcoming. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and golden light spilled from the windows onto the white ground. A weathered sign by the gate read, "Double Creek Ranch." Before they could knock, the front door swung open. A tall man stood silhouetted against the warm interior light, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. He wore simple work clothes and a brown leather vest, his dark hair slightly mussed, as if he had been running his hands through it. Behind him, Sarah Beth could see the flicker of a fire and hear the soft sound of someone moving about. "Folks, you look half frozen," the man said, his voice deep and kind. Come in, I'm Jake Morrison." Sarah Beth hesitated, suddenly aware of how she must look in her wedding dress, standing in the snow like some lost fairy tale princess. "I'm Sarah Beth Whitmore. I was traveling to the Lazy T Ranch, but our coach got stuck. I'm supposed to marry Thomas McKinnon." The Jake's expression changed, a flicker of something crossing his features. "The Lazy T, that's 15 miles east of here. But you can't travel in this weather. Please, come inside and warm up." The interior of the house enveloped Sarah Beth like a gentle embrace. The main room was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts thrown over the chairs. A fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of fresh bread and something savory filled the air. "Papa, who's at the door?" came a small voice from the kitchen. "Come meet our guests, Emma," Jake called softly. A little girl appeared in the doorway, perhaps 6 years old, with Jake's dark hair but the most striking blue eyes Sarah Beth had ever seen. She wore a simple brown dress with a white pinafore, and her hair was braided with small blue ribbons. When she saw Sarah Beth, her mouth fell open in wonder. "Oh my," Emma whispered, her small hands pressed to her cheeks. "You look like an angel." Sarah Beth felt her heart catch. "Hello Emma, I'm Sarah Beth." The child approached slowly, as if Sarah Beth might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Are you really wearing a wedding dress? Are you getting married?" "I was supposed to," Sarah Beth said, kneeling down at Emma's level, "but our coach got stuck in the snow." Emma's eyes grew wide with sudden understanding. Then, in a voice so soft it was barely audible, she whispered, "God finally sent you to us." Jake cleared his throat, his face flushing. "Emma, don't bother Miss Whitmore with." "It's no bother," Sarah Beth said quickly, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. There was something about this child that called to her heart. "What do you mean, Emma?" The little girl looked up at her father, then back to Sarah Beth. "I've been praying every night for God to send us a mama. Papa gets so lonely, especially when he thinks I'm sleeping. And I've been lonely too, with just the two of us here." Sarah Beth felt tears prick her eyes. She looked up at Jake, who was staring at his daughter with a mixture of love and embarrassment. "Emma, you shouldn't," he began. "She lost her mother 2 years ago," Jake explained quietly to Sarah Beth, "during a fever that swept through the territory. Emma was very sick too, but she pulled through. Since then, it's just been the two of us." As the evening wore on, Sarah Beth found herself drawn deeper into the warmth of their small family. Jake prepared a simple but delicious supper of beef stew and fresh biscuits, apologizing repeatedly for the humble fare. Emma chattered constantly, asking Sarah Beth about her dress, her hair, her journey from Boston, and 100 other things with the boundless curiosity of childhood. "Do you know how to braid hair?" Emma asked as they sat by the fire after supper. "Papa tries," but he's not very good at it. Sarah Beth smiled, gently taking down Emma's braids and beginning to redo them with nimble fingers. My mother taught me when I was about your age. She said a lady should always know how to make herself and others beautiful. Emma sighed contentedly as Sarah Beth's fingers worked through her dark hair. Your hands are so gentle. Papa's are good for fixing things and working with the horses, but they're too big for lady things. But Jake watched from his chair by the fire, whittling a small piece of wood. Emma's right about that. I'm afraid I'm better with leather than with lace. What are you making? Sarah Beth asked, nodding toward the wood in his hands. A little horse for Emma. She's been wanting one for her collection. He held up the partially carved figure, and Sarah Beth could see the careful attention to detail, the love that went into each cut. As the night deepened, the wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling past the glass. Jake shook his head when he looked outside. You won't be traveling anywhere tomorrow, I'm afraid. This storm's settling in to stay for a while. Sarah Beth should have felt worried about missing her wedding, about Thomas waiting for her at the Lazy T Ranch. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace sitting here by the fire with Jake and Emma. The child had fallen asleep against her shoulder, and Sarah Beth found herself gently stroking the little girl's hair. She doesn't usually take to strangers so quickly, Jake said softly, careful not to wake his daughter. But then again, she's been praying for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone kind, someone gentle, someone who could love her like a mother should. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. I've tried to be both parents to her, but there are things a man just can't understand about raising a little girl. Sarah Beth looked down at Emma's peaceful face. She's beautiful. And so bright. You've done wonderfully with her. Have I? Jake's voice held a note of uncertainty. Some days I wonder if I'm enough. If she needs more than I can give her. The fire crackled softly between them, filling the comfortable silence. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. Sarah Beth found herself thinking not about Thomas McKinnon, whom she had never met, but about this quiet man and his precious daughter who had welcomed her so completely into their home. Jake, she said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel like God has a plan, even when we can't see it? Jake was quiet for a long moment. My wife used to say that. She believed everything happened for a reason, even the hard things. I've struggled with that belief since she passed. Maybe. Sarah Beth said gently. Some blessings come disguised as accidents. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Sarah Beth woke on the small sofa where Jake had insisted she sleep, covered with one of Emma's colorful quilts. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Emma was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, her hair neatly braided. Jake's work, though it was charmingly crooked. Good morning, Sarah Beth. Emma called out cheerfully. Papa made breakfast. He's a good cook even if he can't braid hair. Jake emerged from the kitchen, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. His cheeks were slightly red. Whether from the morning cold or embarrassment, Sarah Beth couldn't tell. The roads should be passable by afternoon, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I can take you to the Lazy T then. Sarah Beth accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. Thank you, you've been so kind. Emma suddenly became very quiet, staring down at her plate. Do you have to go? She asked in a small voice. Sarah Beth felt her heart squeeze. I know you're supposed to marry that other man, Emma continued, her voice trembling. But couldn't you stay here instead? Couldn't you marry Papa and be my mama? Emma, Jake said sharply, but not unkindly. You can't ask such things. But Emma's eyes were fixed on Sarah Beth with desperate hope. I dreamed about you last night. You were teaching me to sew and singing lullabies and helping Papa with the ranch. It felt so real. Sarah Beth knelt beside Emma's chair, taking the child's small hands in hers. Emma, sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. I made a promise to marry Mr. McKinnon, but what if God sent you here instead? Emma whispered. What if he changed the plan? That afternoon, as Jake hitched up his wagon to take Sarah Beth to the Lazy T Ranch, she found herself moving slowly, as if her feet were reluctant to carry her toward her intended destination. Emma clung to her skirts, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please don't go, the little girl sobbed. Please stay with us. Jake gently pried his daughter's hands free. Emma, we talked about this. Miss Whitmore has to go. But as he helped Sarah Beth into the wagon, their hands touched, and she felt something pass between them, a recognition, a possibility, a question that neither dared voice. The ride to the Lazy T Ranch was quiet, except for the jingle of harness and the soft crunch of snow under the wagon wheels. Sarah Beth found herself memorizing Jake's profile, the way he held the reins, the careful consideration he gave to every bump and turn to ensure her comfort. When they finally arrived at the Lazy T Ranch, Thomas McKinnon was waiting on his front porch. He was a large man with a red beard and kind eyes, but Sarah Beth felt no flutter of recognition, no sense of coming home. Miss Whitmore? Thomas called out, hurrying down the steps. I was worried sick when you didn't arrive yesterday. Sarah Beth climbed down from Jake's wagon, her legs unsteady. Mr. McKinnon, I'm sorry our coach got stuck, and Mr. Morrison here was kind enough to give me shelter. Thomas shook Jakey's hand heartily. "Jake Morrison, good to see you, neighbor. I'm grateful you looked after my bride." Sarah Beth winced at the word, bride, though she couldn't say why. As Thomas began discussing wedding plans for the following week, Sarah Beth found herself looking back at Jake, who sat quietly in his wagon, waiting to leave. Their eyes met across the snowy yard, and in that moment, Sarah Beth knew with absolute certainty that her heart belonged elsewhere. "Mr. McKinnon," she said suddenly, interrupting his enthusiastic description of the wedding feast he had planned, "I'm afraid I need to speak with you privately." An hour later, Sarah Beth walked back across the snow to where Jake still waited by his wagon. Thomas McKinnon, after his initial shock, had proven to be as kind as his letters had suggested. He had listened to her explanation with understanding, even admitting that he had felt no particular connection when they met. "I think," he had said with a gentle smile, "that God sometimes has better plans than the ones we make for ourselves." Jake looked up as she approached, his expression carefully neutral. "Ready to come back and collect your things?" "Actually," Sarah Beth said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I was hoping to collect something else." Jake's eyes widened. "Sarah Beth, that little girl of yours told me that God finally sent me to you. What if she's right? What if all of this, the storm, the stuck coach, ending up at your ranch instead of here, what if it was all meant to be?" The Jake climbed down from the wagon slowly, as if afraid this moment might shatter like ice. "You don't even know me. I know you're kind. I know you're a good father. I know you make Emma laugh and that you carve little horses for her collection. I know you took in a stranger without question and treated her like family." Sarah Beth stepped closer. "And I know that in one night, I felt more at home in your house than I ever did in all my years in Boston." Jake reached out tentatively, his roughened fingers gentle as they touched her cheek. "Are you sure? This life isn't easy. The winters are hard, and the work is never done." "I'm sure," Sarah Beth whispered, "if you'll have me." The ride back to the Double Creek Ranch seemed to take half the time. Emma must have been watching from the window, because she came running out into the snow before the wagon had even stopped, her face shining with joy. "You came back," she cried, launching herself into Sarah Beth's arms. "I knew you would. I knew God wouldn't take you away from us." That evening, as Sarah Beth helped Emma prepare for bed, the little girl looked up at her with solemn eyes. "Are you going to be my mama now?" she asked quietly. Sarah Beth brushed a strand of dark hair from Emma's forehead. "If that's what you'd like." "More than anything," Emma whispered, "I've been praying so hard and now you're here." "Sometimes," Sarah Beth said softly, "the best things in life come to us when we least expect them, in ways we never planned." 3 days later, on a crisp winter morning with the sun shining bright on fresh snow, Sarah Beth Whitmore became Sarah Beth Morrison in a simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor. The local preacher had traveled through the snow to perform the service, and Emma stood beside them both, holding a bouquet of pine branches tied with blue ribbons. As Jake slipped a simple gold band onto Sarah Beth's finger, Emma whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "I told you God had a plan." Sarah Beth looked into Jake's warm brown eyes, then down at the little girl who had somehow known from the very first moment that she belonged here, in this place, with this family. The wedding dress that had traveled so far from Boston finally found its purpose, not in the grand ceremony that had been planned, but in this quiet moment of three hearts becoming one. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, covering their little ranch in a blanket of peace. And in the years that followed, whenever Emma told the story of how her new mama came to them, she always ended it the same way. Sometimes God sends people to the wrong place so they can find the right one. Sarah Beth never disagreed.